Lexington County, South Carolina, June 6, 1986. Before sunrise, a mother awoke to find her 5-year-old daughter missing from her bed. The window was open. Muddy footprints stained the carpet, and a small yellow teddy bear lay abandoned on the floor, the only witness to what happened that night. For 34 years, no one knew where she went or who had taken her, until modern forensic science uncovered the fingerprints that changed everything. This is the story of a town that lost its innocence, a family that refused to give up, and a secret buried so deep it took 3 decades to resurface. What happened to little Marissa Lowell on that humid southern night? Stay with us, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why some ghosts never stay buried. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the truth behind the cases time tried to forget. The heavy doors of the Lexington County Courthouse creaked open, ushering in a swirl of humid South Carolina air and the whispers of restless anticipation. It was June 2020, and for the first time in over 3 decades, the shadows of the past were dragged into the glaring light of justice. At the center of the courtroom, under the steady hum of fluorescent lights, sat a man who had mastered the art of disappearing into ordinary life. Victor Hanlon, now pushing 70, his once dark hair overtaken by streaks of silver, perched uncomfortably in the defendant's chair. His hands, wrinkled and sun-spotted, twisted in his lap. The lines etched into his face told stories of a life lived long, and perhaps not always honestly. Across the aisle, the Lowell family had gathered, finally confronting the man accused of stealing their daughter from them in the summer of 1986. Evelyn Lowell, older now, hair more salt than pepper, hands gripping the arms of her chair with a trembling resolve, had not missed a single day in the pursuit of answers. Beside her sat Clara, her surviving daughter, who had been just a child when the nightmare began. Now an adult, Clara's eyes still held the shadows of that night, the unanswered questions, the pain of growing up with a sister who was always missing from family photographs. A hush settled as the judge entered, his robe flowing behind him like a storm cloud. Lawyers shuffled their papers, the audience held its breath, and the prosecution rose to address the court. The lead prosecutor, a woman with fire in her voice, stared directly at Victor. Her words were not just for the jury, but for every person in Lexington who had whispered the Lowell family's name with pity or suspicion over the past 34 years. "We have waited 34 years to bring justice for Marissa Lowell," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of generations. For 34 years, her mother has asked, "Where is my daughter?" For 34 years, her sister has wondered, "Why was she taken?" And for 34 years, this community has asked, "Why has the truth stayed buried until now?" In the gallery, the question echoed, hanging heavy over the heads of reporters, curious locals, and the family members of the victim. Some stared at Victor with thinly veiled contempt, others with a desperate need for closure. The air vibrated with the sense that something momentous was about to unfold, that the secrets kept hidden for decades could not withstand the scrutiny of modern science and the unyielding determination of a family that never let hope die. As the prosecutor continued, Victor's gaze flickered downward. He avoided Evelyn's eyes. He avoided Clara's, too. There was nowhere to hide. Not in this courtroom. Not anymore. Reporters scratched notes. Cameras flashed as the judge instructed the jury to focus on the evidence, not the rumors that had swirled for decades. Yet everyone present could feel the raw edges of pain, The wounds that had never healed, the agony of a mother who had watched the seasons turn and the milestones pass. Always one child short at the dinner table, always a room left untouched for a daughter who never returned home. As witnesses were called, the facts of the case were laid out. But the emotions, rage, grief, hope, could not be contained by procedure. Evelyn's lips quivered as the prosecutor spoke of a summer night long ago, when the world was safe and small and full of laughter. Clara squeezed her mother's hand, her own heart pounding as the memories returned, sharper now than they had been in years. She could almost hear the crickets outside the old wooden house, feel the sticky heat of that night, sense the moment her life was split into before and after. Victor Hanlon, for his part, maintained an uneasy composure. The defense attorney whispered to him, but Victor barely nodded, as if realizing that the passage of time offered no protection. The years he'd spent living a quiet life in North Carolina, blending in, meant nothing now. The questions had finally caught up with him. The prosecutor's final statement that morning left the courtroom silent. For 34 years, Marissa Lowell has been lost. Today, we ask not only what happened to her, but why this truth is only surfacing now. What secrets have been buried with her memory? And what will it cost us to finally uncover them? As the judge called a recess, Evelyn remained seated, her eyes never leaving Victor. She had waited a lifetime for this moment, and she would not let it slip away. Across the aisle, Victor's shoulders slumped, his mask of indifference faltering for just a second. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with cameras and reporters eager for sound bites. Inside, the Lowell family huddled together, a living testament to the power of love and persistence. Their pain now transformed into a battle cry for justice. What happened to Marissa Lowell? For 3 decades, the question haunted every corner of Lexington, South Carolina. And now, with the world watching, the answers were about to surface, no matter how dark or devastating they might be. Before the world changed forever, Lexington, South Carolina, was the kind of place where children raced barefoot down dusty roads and neighbors waved from wide, sagging porches. The air tasted of honeysuckle and promise, and on long summer evenings, the low hum of cicadas was the loudest sound in the world. It was the late 1980s, a time when parents left their doors unlocked, and the biggest worry most folks had was whether rain would spoil a weekend barbecue. The Lowell family lived in a small wooden house at the edge of town, its white paint peeling in the sun, but always swept and neat. Inside, the walls echoed with laughter, most of it belonging to 5-year-old Marissa. She was the kind of child who drew people in like sunlight through an open window. Her curly blonde hair bounced as she skipped along the porch, blue eyes sparkling with an endless stream of questions. She clutched her yellow teddy bear close to her chest everywhere she went, the bear's fur matted from so much love and the occasional tear. When Marissa smiled, the whole street seemed to brighten. Her mother, Evelyn, worked long hours at the local diner, but never let exhaustion steal her warmth. She raised Marissa and her older sister Clara alone, doing her best to shield them from the hardships she faced. Clara, just 2 years older than Marissa, was her constant companion. The girls shared everything: crayons worn down to nubs, coloring books filled with wild scribbles, and secret dreams whispered under patchwork blankets. Their home was humble, but Evelyn filled it with small joys. Marissa loved to color, her chubby fingers grasping crayons as she filled the world with her imagination. Sometimes she would sit for hours on the porch steps, lost in thought, her teddy bear propped up beside her. both of them watching the sky turn golden at sunset. Neighbors passing by would call out to her, and she'd wave back, always eager to share her newest drawing or a silly story. People in Lexington called her the laughter of the neighborhood. She had a way of dissolving grown-up troubles, her giggles floating across fences, her bright-eyed wonder infectious. She loved animals, chasing butterflies in the backyard and feeding crusts of bread to the birds. More than once, she brought home stray kittens, eyes wide with hope that her mother would let her keep just one more. The town itself was an intricate web of connections, where everyone knew everyone else's business, for better or worse. Old men played checkers outside the hardware store, and women exchanged news while hanging laundry. In the evening, the streets filled with the scents of fried chicken and fresh-cut grass. It was a place that seemed suspended in time, safe and predictable. But underneath that peaceful surface, small worries festered. Evelyn, like many parents, harbored quiet fears that she never voiced, about bills piling up, about raising 2 daughters alone, about the stories she sometimes heard on the news. Still, she clung to the hope that Lexington was different, that here, in this close-knit community, her girls would be safe. Marissa's presence was a balm to everyone who met her. She had a gift for kindness, slipping handmade cards into her mother's purse or tucking wildflowers behind Clara's ear. Even when she argued with her sister, her anger never lasted long. Apologies always came quickly, hugs following close behind. To Evelyn, Marissa was a miracle, a bright spot in an often difficult life. That summer, Marissa and Clara spent long days playing hide-and-seek in the backyard, chasing each other through the rows of vegetables, inventing elaborate stories that made their little house feel like a castle. The sisters fell asleep each night in the same small room, windows open to catch the evening breeze, sharing whispered secrets until sleep claimed them. Looking back, it is easy to remember only the goodness, the giggles, the sunlit afternoons, the feeling that nothing bad could ever happen in a place so gentle. It is harder to remember the subtle shadows that lurked at the edges, the way strangers sometimes lingered too long on the sidewalk, the occasional argument overheard through thin walls, the fear that every parent keeps locked away. But before tragedy shattered their lives, the Lowells were just another family in Lexington, held together by love and routine, buoyed by the smallest of joys. Marissa, with her golden curls and ever-present teddy bear, was the heart of it all. No one could have imagined that in a single night, the laughter would be silenced, and the warmth that filled their little house would be replaced by an emptiness so deep it threatened to swallow them whole. In 1986, Lexington still believed in its innocence, but all that was about to change, forever. June 6, 1986 arrived with a thick, damp heat that clung to the old wooden houses of Lexington, South Carolina. Crickets sang in the twilight, and the town settled into the slow rhythm of another southern summer night. At the Lowell home, the day ended like so many others before it, with the gentle bustle of bedtime, the scent of bath soap lingering in the air, and the faint, distant sound of a radio playing through the neighbor's window. Evelyn moved through the small house on tired feet, smoothing sheets and checking locks as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. In the girls' bedroom, Marissa and Clara were already tucked beneath a thin cotton blanket. Marissa clung to her yellow teddy bear, eyes fluttering closed, her curls splayed across the pillow. Clara whispered something only her sister could hear, something about a dream she hoped to have, or a game they might play in the morning. Evelyn paused in the doorway, heart swelling with gratitude, and a quiet hope that tomorrow would be just as ordinary. The heat was relentless, pressing against the house and seeping in through every crack. Evelyn lifted the window, letting in a sluggish breeze. She kissed both girls goodnight, her lips brushing their foreheads. The small ritual, one last check of the doors, one last glance at her daughters, was her shield against the worries that sometimes crept in after dark. She left the window open just a sliver, thinking only of comfort, never danger. Hours passed. The house grew still. Outside, the night pressed in, thick with the scent of wet grass and wildflowers. Inside, the girls drifted into sleep, their breathing slow and even, the only sound in the darkness. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The world felt safe and closed, the kind of safety that makes horror seem impossible. But at 3 a.m., everything changed. Clara, tangled in a restless dream, stirred awake. Moonlight filtered through the window, painting pale shapes on the walls. The room was quiet, but something felt wrong. An electric charge in the air, the prickle of fear crawling along her skin. At first, she thought she was still dreaming. Then, through half-lidded eyes, she saw a shadow. It moved with eerie slowness, tall and deliberate, bending over Marissa's bed. For a moment, Clara could not breathe. The figure loomed in the pale blue light. His movements strangely careful, as though rehearsed. She heard the faintest whisper of cloth, the squeak of a floorboard. Frozen by terror, Clara's mind screamed for her to move, to call out, but her body refused to obey. She watched as the man reached down, lifting Marissa from her bed, her teddy bear slipping from her grasp and thumping softly to the floor. A sharp jolt of fear snapped Clara awake. She squeezed her eyes shut, pulling the blanket over her head, as if the thin fabric could protect her from the nightmare taking shape beside her. Her heart hammered wildly. Every sound, the shuffle of feet, the creak of the window, became magnified in the silence. She waited for the man to leave, for Marissa to cry out, for someone to come running. But no sound followed. Only the empty quiet and the sickening certainty that something was horribly wrong. Minutes crawled by. Or maybe it was only seconds. Clara remained perfectly still, every muscle locked in fear. At last, when the room was silent again, she allowed herself to peek out from under the blanket. Marissa's bed was empty. The window hung wide open, the humid night air pouring in. The yellow teddy bear lay abandoned on the floor, its button eyes reflecting the moonlight, a silent witness to the horror that had just unfolded. Dawn came slowly, casting gold across the empty bed. Evelyn entered the room, expecting to find her daughters tangled in sleep. She stopped cold at the threshold, eyes wide with disbelief. The sheets were rumpled, Marissa's favorite toy left behind, muddy footprints staining the carpet beneath the open window. Panic seized her, sharp and overwhelming. She called for Marissa, her voice echoing down the hallway, but the house answered only with silence. It was a silence that would stretch for years, a single night splintering into decades of longing, searching, and unanswered prayers. The normalcy of their small southern world shattered in an instant, replaced by dread and questions that would never let go. On that humid summer night, innocence vanished, leaving behind nothing but fear, heartbreak, and a yellow teddy bear on the floor. The morning light that crept through the Lowell family's windows should have brought another ordinary day, but the air inside the small house felt heavy, suffocating, transformed by terror. Evelyn's frantic cry shattered the stillness, sending a ripple through every wall, every corner. Clara, shivering in her bed, could only clutch the edge of her blanket as her mother's footsteps thundered through the hallway. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for the phone, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every rational thought. Her fingers misdialed twice before she managed to connect with the 911 dispatcher, her words tumbling out in a raw, panicked stream. Her daughter, her baby, was gone. The window open, footprints on the floor, no sign of where she'd gone or who had taken her. The local police responded with urgency rarely seen in Lexington. Within the hour, patrol cars rolled up and down the sleepy street, red and blue lights painting the dawn in flashing color. Uniformed officers cordoned off the house, keeping curious neighbors at bay. Soon, a team of volunteers, friends, relatives, strangers who had heard the news on their morning radios, gathered outside. The sense of unity that had always defined this small town twisted into collective anxiety and grief. Detectives moved quickly, canvassing the neighborhood for any sign of Marissa. They combed the yard and examined the open window, collecting what little evidence the intruder had left behind. In the humid air, the muddy footprints stood out starkly against the carpet, a dark trail leading from the window and vanishing into the yard. Officers found the yellow teddy bear lying forgotten, its plush fur soiled by the footprints, a mute testament to the violence of the night. By midday, search dogs were on the scene, straining at their leashes as they sniffed through the tangled grass and wooded lots behind the Lowell house. The search grew in scope, reaching down to the riverbanks, abandoned wells, sheds overgrown with weeds. Dozens of people fanned out, calling Marissa's name into the dense summer air, their voices growing hoarse with hope and fear. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their shadows skimming the treetops. For a time, it seemed as if the entire county was out searching, each neighbor driven by the desperate hope that a little girl might be found before the sun set again. The local media seized on the story, broadcasting the details in breathless tones. A 5-year-old girl vanished from her bedroom in the dead of night, a family left in ruins, a town shaken to its core. Television crews showed up at the scene, their cameras capturing the somber faces of searchers, the frantic determination of Evelyn and Clara. Missing posters with Marissa's smiling face appeared in every shop window, every telephone pole and church bulletin. Parents in Lexington became gripped by a new kind of fear. Doors that had always been left open were locked tight. Children were no longer allowed to play unattended. Strangers were met with suspicion, and every unfamiliar car was noted and reported. A current of anxiety pulsed through the town, drowning out the peace that had once seemed so permanent. Inside the Lowell home, the investigation settled into a pattern of grim ritual. Detectives questioned Evelyn and Clara separately, probing for details, looking for anything that might offer a clue. Evelyn answered with a desperate kind of focus, replaying the previous night again and again, searching for any small detail she might have missed. Clara, still in shock, struggled to speak of the shadow in the room, the sound of footsteps, the moment when everything safe and familiar vanished. As the days dragged on, the initial wave of hope began to fade. Despite exhaustive efforts, no one found a trace of Marissa. No item of clothing, no sign of struggle, no footprints leading beyond the backyard. The woods and riverbanks gave up no secrets. The sense of collective purpose slowly turned to frustration and despair. Without direct evidence, the investigation ground to a halt. Suspects were questioned and cleared, leads dried up, and the detectives assigned to the case cycled in and out, their faces growing longer each time they returned empty-handed. The teddy bear was collected and sealed in a plastic bag, a symbol of everything the family had lost. The room that once rang with laughter became a shrine to absence, its silence growing heavier with each passing day. The case became more than just a family tragedy. It was a story that haunted the town, a dark presence lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life. And as the summer dragged on and the days grew shorter, hope slipped away, leaving only questions that no one could answer and a pain that would never truly fade. As summer faded into autumn, the initial urgency surrounding Marissa's disappearance began to erode, replaced by a heavy, grinding sense of helplessness. For the detectives assigned to the case, the first place to look was close to home. They scrutinized every detail of the Lowell family's life, hunting for cracks, secrets, any sign of conflict that could explain the unthinkable. Evelyn's ex-boyfriend quickly became the first focus of suspicion. He was a man with a rough reputation, temperamental, sometimes seen drinking too much at the bar downtown, and known for a violent outburst or two in his past. His relationship with Evelyn had ended badly, and his presence had always made the girls uneasy. But as officers tracked down his whereabouts that night, interviewed friends and checked surveillance from nearby gas stations, his alibi held strong. He'd spent the evening in the company of others, his timeline airtight. Still, the rumors didn't fade. Some whispered about feuds and jealousies. Others speculated about strangers passing through town, or a long-lost relative with a grudge. The detectives pressed on, digging deeper. As they dusted the window frame for fingerprints, they found several smudges that did not match anyone in the family or the ex-boyfriend. In the grass beneath the window, a discarded cigarette butt was recovered, a cheap brand, common enough to offer little real insight, but still cataloged and sent to the lab. Forensics in the 1980s, though, were a far cry from the technology of today. The fingerprints could not be conclusively identified, and the cigarette yielded no answers. The carpet inside the girls' room revealed more footprints, but none led anywhere definitive. The muddy tracks might have belonged to a neighbor or a police officer as easily as a perpetrator. The yellow teddy bear, beloved and battered, was carefully bagged and examined for fibers or hair, but nothing conclusive emerged. Each piece of evidence led only to more questions. Weeks passed, and the tone of the investigation shifted. Without solid leads, suspicion and gossip took on lives of their own. Some neighbors claimed to have seen a strange car cruising slowly through the neighborhood in the days before the abduction. Others insisted it was just a delivery driver or a lost tourist. The police interviewed dozens of people, but nothing stuck. Flyers with Marissa's face grew faded in the sun, curled and weather-beaten, ignored by those who'd grown weary of waiting for answers. Evelyn, racked by guilt and anger, became a fixture at the police station. She brought in lists of names, chased down any new rumor herself, refused to let Marissa's memory slip away. Each new false lead was a fresh wound. Clara, still reeling, clung to her mother as nightmares came nightly. Always the shadow at the window, always the feeling of being watched. Their home became a fortress, every window nailed shut, every lock checked and rechecked before bed. Over time, even the most promising clues faded. The ex-boyfriend moved away, hounded by suspicion he could never quite escape. Old friends stopped coming by, afraid to say the wrong thing or stir up new pain. Some believed Marissa had been taken out of state, her fate sealed by someone seeking revenge against Evelyn or her family. Others feared the worst, that she'd been killed and hidden somewhere too well for even the most determined search to uncover. As the years crawled by, the file on Marissa Lowell's case grew thick with false starts, dead ends, and the names of men who would never be charged. The town, unable to shake the shadow of loss, moved on in fits and starts. New families arrived, and the story became a cautionary tale parents used to keep their children close. Older residents still watched strangers with suspicion, haunted by the memory of the little girl who'd vanished without a trace. For the Lowell family, the loss was a daily ache. Evelyn kept Marissa's room untouched, the toys still arranged along the windowsill, the yellow bear hidden away in a drawer. Clara grew quieter, more withdrawn, her world shrinking as she struggled to escape the memory of that night. The case went cold, and with every passing season, the hope of finding answers faded. But somewhere deep inside, a spark remained, fueled by the desperate love of a mother, the haunted dreams of a sister, and the stubborn refusal to let Marissa become just another missing child lost to time. Time moved forward in Lexington, but for the Lowell family it crawled, heavy with the weight of what had been lost. The world changed. New presidents, new fashions, technology blooming across the country. But inside their small wooden house, the air never quite shifted. Grief settled into the corners like dust, gathering in every unspoken word and every empty chair at the dinner table. Evelyn never considered leaving Lexington. She was tethered to that little patch of earth by hope and heartbreak alike. Marissa's yellow teddy bear, once a source of comfort, now lived in the bottom drawer of Evelyn's nightstand. Every June 6th, she would take it out, hands trembling, the faded fur rough beneath her fingertips. She'd light a candle on the kitchen table and sit in the hush, eyes fixed on the flickering flame, whispering a promise to the darkness. She would not stop searching, not ever, not until she knew the truth. The rest of the year, Evelyn carried on in a kind of suspended animation. She continued working at the diner, her smile thinner, but always there for the regulars who'd come to rely on her kindness. The community tiptoed around her pain, some offering gentle words, others avoiding her altogether, unable to face the reminder that safety was only ever an illusion. Clara grew up with the shadow of that night trailing her every step. As a child, she'd bolt awake from nightmares so real she could taste the fear. Each time the same vision gripped her, a man's silhouette framed by moonlight, Marissa's small body limp in his arms, the silent plea in her sister's eyes. Even as she grew older, the memory refused to fade. She saw it in the faces of strangers, in the way the wind rustled the curtains at dusk, in the hush that fell over her mother when Marissa's name was spoken. School became a gauntlet of whispered gossip and sideways glances. Other children were curious, sometimes cruel. "The little girl who vanished from her own bedroom," they'd say, their voices a blend of fear and fascination. Clara grew guarded, retreating into herself. She kept few friends, trusting no one with the storm inside her chest. Teachers praised her quiet focus, but at home the weight of silence pressed down harder each year. The house itself changed, its heartbeat stilled. Marissa's room was left untouched, bed made, coloring books stacked neatly, a faded drawing taped to the wall. Evelyn dusted it every week, unwilling to let the memory slip away, even as the world outside seemed determined to forget. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, Evelyn would sit on Marissa's bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall every detail of her daughter's laughter. Sometimes, she could almost hear it echoing in the hallway. As the seasons shifted, the story of Marissa Lowell became legend in Lexington. New families who moved in heard the tale from neighbors, how a sweet 5-year-old disappeared without a trace, How the police had searched every inch of forest and field. How no one had ever been held responsible. Over time, the fear softened into myth. But for Evelyn and Clara, it was never less than real. The police file gathered dust on a shelf at the county station. Detectives came and went, each reviewing the evidence with the same grim determination, each leaving with more questions than answers. Occasionally, a new tip would surface, a sighting in another state, a confession from a man desperate for attention, an old photo sent by someone convinced they'd seen Marissa. Each time, Evelyn would wait by the phone, hope rising, only to have it dashed again and again. Each disappointment carved deeper grooves in her spirit. Decades slipped by. The world outside their window grew noisier, brighter, faster. But inside the Lowell home, time had stalled. Clara graduated high school, then college, but the family never celebrated. Marissa's absence was always present, a phantom limb, an ache that no one could touch. Clara moved out eventually, unable to bear the reminders. Yet every June 6th, she returned home, joining her mother at the table, candlelight flickering between them, the teddy bear resting silently beside the flame. Through all the silent years, love and longing endured. The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger, even as hope withered. Together, they waited, year after year, refusing to surrender to the silence, determined to keep Marissa's memory alive until the world remembered her too. More than 3 decades after Marissa Lowell's disappearance, the world had changed in ways the 1980s could never have imagined. Satellite dishes dotted the old rooftops of Lexington. People checked the news on smartphones, not newspapers. But inside Evelyn Lowell's house, little was different. Her routines as precise as ever, the ache of absence unchanged. Then, in 2020, a letter arrived. Plain white envelope, the government seal pressed in one corner. The Cold Case Unit, in cooperation with the FBI, was reopening Marissa's file. Advances in forensic technology had inspired a new wave of hope, and a team of investigators had begun combing through old evidence, looking for answers lost to time. For Evelyn and Clara, it was as if a match had been struck in a darkened room, a flicker of possibility, both terrifying and bright. The team set up shop in the county sheriff's office, bringing computers, high-resolution scanners, and forensic kits that hadn't existed when Marissa vanished. The first step: dust off the boxes of evidence, carefully cataloged and long dormant. There was Marissa's teddy bear, bagged and tagged, still stained with the memories of that night. The window frame, preserved in photographs and fingerprint cards, held the echoes of panic and despair. The cigarette butt, long overlooked, was finally subjected to DNA analysis. In a room humming with nervous anticipation, the forensic technicians worked late into the night. Old fingerprint cards were scanned and run through a modern national database, something the original investigators could only have dreamed of. Genetic material was teased from the cigarette filter, cross-referenced with new techniques unavailable for most of Evelyn's lifetime. The first real break in the case arrived quietly. A set of prints lifted from the window frame matched an entry in the system: Victor Hanlon, a name that stirred faint memories in the minds of the original officers. Hanlon had lived only 2 blocks away from the Lowells in 1986, an unremarkable man at the time, with a string of petty crimes but nothing violent on his record. After Marissa's disappearance, he'd packed up and moved out of state, his absence never fully explained or investigated. Until now, he'd lived an anonymous life in North Carolina, keeping a low profile, leaving no trail that would connect him to the unsolved horror in Lexington. Investigators dug deeper, combing through Hanlon's history. His record was longer than anyone had realized: breaking and entering, theft, multiple counts of trespassing. He'd always seemed to slip through the cracks, careful never to draw too much attention. Yet, as agents tracked his movements, a pattern emerged. Hanlon had always gravitated toward neighborhoods with children, always the quiet observer at the edge of playgrounds, the man who offered to help but was never truly known. Armed with this new evidence, the investigative team built their case piece by piece. They interviewed neighbors who still remembered the summer of '86, reconstructing the comings and goings of the old days. Some recalled Hanlon's car parked late at night. Others remembered a chill that came over them when he was near. One elderly woman described a strange feeling she'd always gotten when Hanlon walked past her porch. Nothing was conclusive, but every memory seemed to fall into place, painting a portrait of a man who had blended in for years, until the science caught up with him. Inside the sheriff's office, the weight of years pressed down on everyone involved. Evelyn was called in to review photographs, answer questions she had answered 1,000 times before. Yet this time, there was a current of hope, a sense that this was not just another false start. Clara, now grown, sat beside her mother, her hands steady, her voice clear as she recounted every detail from that night, her memory no less vivid after so many years. Late one afternoon, the final piece fell into place. Hanlon's fingerprints, found on Marissa's window frame, matched perfectly. DNA from the cigarette butt provided further confirmation. There was no longer room for doubt. For the first time in decades, the Lowells allowed themselves to believe that answers were within reach. The pain of the past was still sharp, but now it was joined by a fierce determination, a refusal to let Marissa's story end in silence. The town of Lexington buzzed with the news, old wounds reopening, but this time with the promise of justice in the air. The puzzle was coming together. The nightmare that had haunted the Lowell family, and the town itself, for 34 years, was about to be confronted in the full light of day. When the arrest warrant was finally issued, the town of Lexington seemed to hold its breath. Word spread quickly. Victor Hanlon, the man who had slipped through their lives unnoticed for so long, was in custody. The sheriff's deputies drove to North Carolina, their convoy slicing through early morning fog. Hanlon was found at his modest house, older now, slower, a man who had learned to blend into the background. He offered no resistance, simply nodded as they cuffed his hands behind his back. His neighbors watched from behind curtains, shocked to learn the quiet retiree next door was wanted for a crime that had haunted Lexington for over 3 decades. Back in South Carolina, preparations for the trial began in earnest. Prosecutors pored over evidence, matching every old fingerprint, every photograph, every yellowed report to Hanlon's record. The once-forgotten clues now formed a clear and damning narrative. The fingerprint on Marissa's window, finally matched by modern science, was indisputable. The DNA from the cigarette butt left in the yard was a second strike. And then came the witness, a former inmate who had shared a cell with Hanlon years ago, who now came forward with a confession he'd heard late one night. Hanlon had bragged, in the darkness between steel bars, about taking a little girl from her bed and how no one would ever find her. The trial became a sensation, drawing crowds to the old courthouse and filling the local news with daily updates. Reporters set up cameras on the courthouse lawn, their voices hushed and urgent as they described the case that refused to fade from memory. Inside, Evelyn and Clara sat side by side, as they had for so many years, hands intertwined, eyes fixed on the man they held responsible for all their pain. Victor Hanlon's defense tried to cast doubt, to suggest the evidence was circumstantial, the witness unreliable. But the years had only sharpened the resolve of those who sought justice. The jury heard about the night Marissa vanished, the frantic search, the years of waiting. They saw the teddy bear, still sealed in a plastic bag, the last thing Marissa ever touched. They listened as Evelyn described the ache of living without answers, of waking every morning and hoping against hope that her daughter would come home. Clara spoke too, her voice steady but her hands trembling as she recounted the moment she woke to see a shadow in her room, the fear that froze her in place. She described the nightmares, the years of sleeplessness, the burden of memory she had carried into adulthood. The courtroom grew quiet as she spoke. No one was untouched by the raw pain of her story. Piece by piece, the prosecution dismantled Hanlon's defenses. The jury watched as his history was laid bare, his petty crimes, his presence in the neighborhood, his movements in the days before Marissa vanished. The testimony from his former cellmate, combined with the physical evidence, left little room for doubt. The case had seemed cold, but the truth could not be kept buried forever. When the verdict was read, a wave of emotion swept the room. Hanlon was found guilty on all counts. The judge, voice solemn, handed down a life sentence. Hanlon barely reacted, only staring at the table in front of him, as if time itself had finally caught up with his crimes. Evelyn and Clara wept, tears of relief, sorrow, and exhaustion. They embraced in the courtroom, the culmination of a lifetime spent fighting for answers. Outside, the crowd murmured, some crying, others shaking their heads at the darkness that had hidden in their midst for so long. Though Marissa's body was never found, the verdict brought a measure of peace, a long-awaited justice that no one dared dream of in the silent years. In the days that followed, the Lowell family's story became a symbol in Lexington and beyond. It was proof that persistence could bend the arc of fate, that love could outlast even the deepest tragedy. The yellow teddy bear, preserved all these years, became a reminder not only of loss, but of hope, of a promise kept through every hardship. Though Marissa never returned, her memory was no longer lost in silence. Justice, though delayed, had finally come. The case closed, but the story endured, carried forward by every parent who held their child a little tighter, every neighbor who watched a little closer, every voice that refused to let the missing be forgotten. As the dust settled after Victor Hanlon's conviction, the story of Marissa Lowell's disappearance and the fierce fight for justice echoed beyond Lexington, South Carolina. It became more than a local tragedy. People far from the quiet streets of the small southern town followed the case, moved by the heartbreak and resilience that had defined the Lowells' lives for more than 3 decades. For many, Marissa's story was not just a chilling reminder of what could go wrong in the most ordinary places. It was also a testament to the power of persistence, the advances of modern science, and the courage of those who never gave up. In the weeks after the trial, newspapers and television reports began to draw a direct line from fiction to fact. Marissa's story, though told through different names and faces, was a mirror for another, painfully real case: the abduction of Jessica Gutierrez in 1986. Like Marissa, Jessica was a little girl living in a modest home in Lexington County. The same air thick with honeysuckle and hope, the same sense of safety that shattered on a single, devastating night. Jessica Gutierrez was only 4 years old when she vanished from her bedroom in the early hours of June 6, 1986. Her mother discovered the empty bed and open window, the world suddenly tilting off its axis. Panic, then shock, then the slow, crushing agony of days turning into weeks and years without answers. The search that followed was exhaustive. Dogs, helicopters, neighbors combing through fields and woods, the same urgent prayers whispered into the humid Carolina dawn. The town's routines fractured. Parents watched their children with new wariness, and Jessica's photograph became a fixture on telephone poles, news reports, and refrigerator doors. For Jessica's family, the agony of uncertainty never loosened its grip. Her mother clung to hope long after most people could not. For years, the Gutierrez case haunted Lexington as a kind of warning and a wound, a tragedy with no closure, a mystery left to fester in the dark. Suspects came and went. Tips dried up. The file grew thick with disappointment, like so many other cold cases across the country. Yet, as the years rolled on, the world changed in ways no one could have imagined. Technology advanced, forensics evolved, and hope found new fuel. Across the nation, old evidence was dusted off and run through databases that didn't exist in the 1980s. Families who had spent decades in limbo received calls from detectives who offered them something new, possibility. For the Gutierrez family, that call came nearly 40 years after Jessica disappeared. The FBI, working with state authorities, reopened the investigation. Evidence once thought too old to matter, fingerprints, traces of DNA, forgotten witness statements, was re-examined with tools that brought the past into the present. A new suspect emerged, Thomas Eric McDowell, a man who had once lived near the Gutierrez family. He had a record of violence and a history that suddenly made sense in the cold, harsh light of modern investigation. The process was painstaking, and for Jessica's loved ones, each step forward was shadowed by the fear that hope would once again dissolve. Yet the evidence grew stronger. New testing linked McDowell to the scene. His background and statements painted a picture that law enforcement could no longer ignore. When McDowell was finally arrested and brought to trial, the news rippled through Lexington and far beyond, reigniting memories of the summer when innocence vanished from the little town. The outcome brought a measure of relief, though not closure. McDowell was convicted of kidnapping and murder. Jessica's body was never found. Her family, like the fictional Lowells, received justice that was both a balm and a wound, soothing the ache of not knowing, but never erasing the loss itself. The story of Marissa Lowell stands as both a tribute and a testament, a way of honoring real lives touched by tragedy, a reminder that every cold case is a living wound in the heart of a family and a community. Advances in forensic science, the dogged persistence of investigators, and the love that refuses to surrender are not just the stuff of fiction. They are the forces that bring the truth to light, even after decades of darkness. The fictional account serves as a vessel for all the voices that might otherwise fade, for every family that keeps a light in the window, for every parent who waits by the phone, for every community haunted by a child's absence. Stories like these are the connective tissue between what is imagined and what is real, a way of insisting that the missing are never forgotten, and that sometimes, even after the longest silence, justice can find its way home. The courthouse was quieter in the days after the trial, but for Evelyn and Clara Lowell, the world would never return to the gentle rhythms it once knew. Their victory in court was bittersweet. Justice had come, but it arrived years too late for Marissa's laughter to return to their home, too late for childhood dreams to be restored, or for a family to be made whole. Yet, in the hush that followed the verdict, a new kind of peace slowly began to seep in, one born from the knowledge that truth, no matter how deeply buried, had finally come into the light. The story of Marissa Lowell became a lesson, one whispered in kitchens, taught in classrooms, and shared in community meetings across the country. Her case was proof that time can dull memory, but not the need for answers. For decades, it had seemed that evil might triumph by hiding in the cracks of forgotten evidence, in the flaws of an overwhelmed system. But Marissa's family, and others like them, showed that love is not so easily defeated. Theirs was a story not just of grief, but of unwavering persistence. Forensic science had changed everything. When Marissa first vanished, fingerprints and fibers were little more than faint suggestions, rarely enough to turn suspicion into certainty. But as decades passed, the technology caught up to the courage of families who refused to surrender. DNA testing, digital databases, and new investigative techniques became the flashlights that could pierce the shadows of cold cases. Detectives now worked in teams, pooling resources, crossing state lines, determined not to let another child's fate vanish into obscurity. But it wasn't just technology that made the difference. It was the relentless push of those who remembered. Evelyn Lowell's determination kept the story alive in Lexington. Every candle lit on June 6th, every conversation with detectives, every refusal to accept unsolved as a final answer, all of it added up. Clara's courage in facing the past, her willingness to relive the trauma for the sake of truth, was another essential piece. Justice, the story made clear, requires not just science but spirit. Communities, too, took lessons from Marissa's story. Parents became vigilant, not out of paranoia, but out of understanding that even peaceful places are not immune to darkness. Neighborhoods grew closer, the illusion of safety replaced by the practice of looking out for one another. Teachers learned to spot the silent suffering of children who carry hidden wounds. Police departments, often stretched thin, found new purpose in solving the cases that had gone cold, knowing that each solved mystery brought healing not just to families, but to whole towns. Marissa's legacy is the warning that no one is truly safe, but also the reassurance that no evil is beyond the reach of the determined. Justice may take time, sometimes too much time, but it is not an impossible dream. The persistence of those left behind, coupled with advances in science, can tip the scales, even after decades of silence. Yet, the story is also a call to action. It is a reminder that there are still missing children whose faces fade from posters and memories, whose families still wait for closure. It is a plea for vigilance, for compassion, for never allowing these stories to slip quietly into the past. Each unresolved case is a challenge to our society to do better, to use every tool, every ounce of determination to ensure that the missing are not forgotten. If Marissa's story means anything, it is that hope can survive even the longest night, that the work of justice is never done, and that love leaves a mark no amount of time can erase. The yellow teddy bear, now preserved as evidence, is more than a symbol of loss. It is proof that what we cherish most is also what we must fight hardest to protect. So, as the sun sets over Lexington and the courthouse steps grow empty, the message endures. Justice is never out of reach for those who persist. Memory is a torch, passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the voices of the lost are heard, and the lessons of their stories shape the future. If you believe stories like Marissa's and Jessica Gutierrez's should never be forgotten, take a moment now. Like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Let's honor the memory of every missing child and make sure that, together, we keep their light burning, one story, one voice, one act of remembrance at a time.